Eagles, they collapsed at the end of last season. They lost 5 of their final 6 games before flaming out in the first round of the playoffs. You got Jalen Hurts clearly took a step back. The relationship between the QB, the head coach Nick Sirianni, described as, quote, fractured in an article by our own Tim McManus. The friction was seemingly caused by a disagreement about the offensive vision. Hurts, Sirianni gave us their thoughts on the situation at training camp.
The only way to get better is to really look through the things that you felt like you messed up and get better at them, right? But it starts with the humility to say, I messed this up. Jalen and I are in a really good place. Every relationship that you have needs work with everybody, and we've always continued to try to work at that.
My natural nature is to block out the external factors because I think it comes a point where sometimes you question so much and the negativity becomes redundant. So this team is one of those teams that's going to do that, especially with the things that we've been able to experience. And it was a time of development for us, and that's something we learn from.
Hey, look who's joined the fun. EJ Manuel joins us now here on First Take. And, you know, I think it's interesting, EJ, because Jalen Hurts also went to the former Giants DC coordinator, Wink Martindale, called him during camp and said, hey, what did you see? What were the flaws of this Eagles offense, which is something that surprised a lot of folks. Do you believe this situation between Hurts and Sirianni, big deal, no big deal? What do you think?
Brian, it's not a big deal at all, man. I've actually talked to some people in Jalen's camp, and they said he and Coach Sirianni are better than ever. And there's a lot of growth that goes on when you have a franchise quarterback, when you have a team that plays for a Super Bowl, and when things don't work out the following year. Now, they did start off on a great start, go 10-1, and then just down the down stretch, an early exit in the playoffs, and then going 1-6. Everybody's going to be upset. Everybody's going to be frustrated. But ultimately, you bring in a new offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore, I think, is going to help unleash some things within this offense. And again, on third down, they were blitzed more than anybody in the NFL. So as a quarterback, it's really hard to process that way, and you're going to have some frustrations and some ups and downs. So I just believe when you bring in a running back also like Saquon Barkley, take off some of the edge and also can help in protection for Jalen, they're going to be fine this year.
Okay. So I really wanted to highlight that little clip, and especially what EJ said, because I made a clip the other day about the Eagles, Colin Cowherd talking about the issues with Jalen Hurts and kind of that. And so I want to kind of expand on that a little bit further, where I think some of this is probably blown out of proportion, but I do think that there's also some of this, there's a reality to this as well. Like anything, it's not all, and it's not all something, and it's not all nothing either. Last season was obviously, there was a lot of issues, and there was a lot of going to be some drama when you're not playing the best you can, and then when the season ends the way it did. Just imagine what we would have heard about the Kansas City Chiefs if they did not win a Super Bowl. How, Travis Kelce keeps getting in fights and, literally kind of slams into Andy Reid. Rashee Rice is yelling at Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is yelling at everyone else. They were seemingly coming unraveled. Now, they were very fortunate. They were able to put it all together and win a Super Bowl. But if they didn't, and they ended up losing, and let's say they ended up losing, which was definitely possible against the Bills, against the Ravens, we would have heard a lot more stories. We would have heard Travis Kelce was becoming more difficult. A lot of players reportedly said that it was a distraction with Taylor Swift. That we would have heard those reports. There's not a doubt in my mind. But there's two things. One, there's definitely a media bias and a favoritism of Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, which is why it's always funny. People want to say, Nick Wright seems to act like that there's a bias against the Kansas City Chiefs and that people don't like the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'm like, Patrick Mahomes is on every commercial. Andy Reid's on all those commercials. And the Chiefs have had legitimate off the field issues this offseason with high-speed car crashes, hit and run, animal cruelty, discussing awful, terrible things, and yet you don't hear about it at all. No one's barely covering it. They did initially when it first happened, but very, very tiny. Very tiny. There's been no actual deep dive. Whereas if this was the Eagles, if this was the Cowboys, it would be 24/7. What's going on with Rashee Rice? What's going on with Rashee Rice? If it was CeeDee Lamb or AJ Brown who got in that high speed racing, hit and run car crash, they'd be talking about it nonstop. Is it a distraction? What's going on? Is he going to be suspended? Blah, 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 blah. It would just be going on and on. But the Kansas City Chiefs is kind of swept under the rug. Now, all of that aside, I do think that the Eagles can, of course, move forward. They're trying to create this narrative that essentially Sirianni is a disaster and that the Eagles are still they have this fundamental issue at their core, and that's kind of where things went wrong last season. Now, I unpacked that a little bit in an earlier video, and so I want to kind of take where I left off or kind of emphasize things that I maybe did not in that last video. Because I do want to be clear. I do not think, and I have to say Nick, I'm going to call him Nick because when I say his last name, my phone goes off. Nick, the head coach of Philly, I do not think he's a great coach, personally. I do not think he's an elite coach. I think he could be a good coach. But I look at the Eagles as a team that is very iconic, very successful. They are one of the most successful teams in the NFL for the last 20 plus years. It's not up for debate. They have one of the highest amount of playoff wins, Super Bowl appearances, Super Bowl wins. People always want to reference things that happened in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. I don't care about that. That was a million years ago in a different time. It's Yankees fans still want to take pride that they won all those World Series in the 20s. And it's what are we talking about here? It doesn't matter. I don't care what you did before an iPhone even existed. It doesn't matter. It's not even on my radar. So the Eagles, within the last 20 or so years, 30 years, have been a legitimate bona fide top tier franchise. And to me, a franchise like that, as great as that, as iconic as that, as valuable as that, hence why they talk about Philly so much, because they have one of the largest fan bases. Again, not up for debate. They have one of the largest fan bases in the NFL, worldwide, really. They deserve to have a top-level coach. They had the Andy Reid, right? They deserve to have a truly elite coach. They deserve to have a Shanahan, a McVay, an Andy Reid, a Bill Belichick, a Popovich, Phil Jackson. They deserve to have that. I do not think Nick is that coach. That's my read on the situation. I do not think he's that guy. But with that said, this idea though, because then they said earlier, and I unpacked this about him not really being respected and him not being a true expert, so they don't respect his X's and O's. Although I think that there is some truth to that, I do think it's very clear that the locker room really, really likes him, because there's no way that the Eagles would have kept him. There's just no way. If they truly had no respect for him and they truly just did not like him and he was just a disaster and he has a fractured and unhealthy relationship with Jalen Hurts and it's all rocky and oh my God, the sky is falling, there is absolutely no chance the Eagles would have kept him as a head coach. None. The Eagles are not complicit in that. They do not just sit there idly and just say, well, let's just see what happens. They are incredibly aggressive. Incredibly aggressive. They won a Super Bowl. They drafted a quarterback and they moved on from both of them. And 5 years later, with a completely different coach and a completely different quarterback, got back to the Super Bowl. That's unheard of. Okay? There's a statue of the head coach who won the Super Bowl and he's gone. The owner wrote the forward in his book and he's gone. The Eagles are very aggressive. They make moves. So if they really felt that this was really toxic and that Nick was really just not a good head coach, didn't understand, couldn't pull the strings and manage what needs to be done, he would be gone. Because there was legitimate prospects out there, whether it be Bill Belichick, Ben Johnson, there was Harbaugh, there was legitimate people that the Eagles could hire. And I thought they were going to. I really, really did. And the reports that I heard, it was actually that the players love Sirianni so much that that's actually what kept them. And I actually made a video, I think, at the time where I said that's kind of good and bad because a lot of players really love coaches that are fundamentally actually not that good, that end up, like it ends up actually being a problem, that they really like the person and like the coach, but he's just not it. I'm sure there's been plenty of coaches that have been fired that, the players loved, but they should have still been fired because they're just not good enough. And that may be where he lies. Maybe he'll surprise me. And a lot of people want to say, look at the success that they had. And it's like, they have an unbelievable roster, an unbelievable culture that existed before him. And they were able to have such high levels of success because they had two elite coordinators, offensively and defensively. And they, Nick didn't end up having the Eagles be good until he gave up play calling to Shane Steichen. And then they were able to kind of take over some of that the following season. But again, a lot of those wins were misleading because every single one of those wins, I think I did the math before, they could have lost easily. They were given gifts, either dropped interceptions, a million penalties. Like they easily could have, only won like 3 of those games. And save me with the nonsense. Well, any team can say that because it's not true. It's not accurate. The Eagles absolutely could not have started. There was a real possibility that they weren't going to be 10-1 because they, when you look at it, they were not a true bona fide 10-1 team. There was a lot of late game heroics, a lot of questionable calls, a lot of, gifts given from the other team. And so that is a problem. That is a Nick problem because that roster is great. It just is. It was just voted like top 2 or top 3 roster in the NFL. So the expectations are top 2, top 3. And when you don't achieve that, if you don't reach the NFC Championship game, if you don't win a playoff game, you're going for the coach. Someone has to take blame. You're going for the coach. And they were able to say it was the coordinators. Okay, let's see. We got new coordinators. But at the same time, that's the benefit when you are a McVay, when you are a Shanahan, when you are an Andy Reid. It's not on the coordinators to get that offense going. It's on those guys. Those guys are the geniuses. Those guys are the ones that are, calling the plays, that are designing the plays, that are making in-game adjustments, that are not opening themselves to be out-coached in the playoffs. That's not what Nick brings to the table right now. So that leaves him open, open for this scrutiny, for these issues. So I'm excited because I'm a firm believer that the Eagles will be a great team this season because I believe in the roster. I believe in the coordinators that they got. I believe in the changes that they made, the upgrades that they made, both from a coaching standpoint and roster standpoint. And the Eagles historically have been consistently good to great to elite. So this idea that they're just like not going to be able to right this ship, I don't believe that personally. And even if this season ended up not going as planned, I believe that they would go out and get a big coach. If they realize Jalen Hurts isn't the guy, they will make a move. They want to be consistently competitive and consistently be at the top of the NFL. And that is who they've been for the last 25 years. Why they have second or third most playoff wins in that time. Why they've gone to more Super Bowls than most teams have playoff wins. The Eagles have more Super Bowl appearances, or they have the same number of Super Bowl appearances as Dak Prescott just has wins alone, playoff wins, as my camera continues to go out. So the Eagles have a lot at stake here. They want to consistently be in a position to win a Super Bowl, and because of that, those are the types of decisions they make. So if they didn't think that Nick was in a position to be able to get them to that point, then they would move on from him, which is why they moved on from Doug Peterson. They reached the conclusion Doug Peterson is maybe not that great of a coach, that it was maybe some other factors at play. We're moving on from him. Right or wrong, that's the decision that they made. And I can always appreciate when a team makes a decision like that. I can always appreciate when a team and a franchise is being proactive. But those are just my thoughts. I would absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think? Do you think that the Eagles and Sirianni and Jalen Hurts like have a major issue at hand, or do you think that this is kind of just being blown out of proportion and this is just kind of some negative bias? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I would absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.